Hi, and welcome to episode 17 of the, I nearly forgot it there, of the Health is Wealth podcast. And just myself and Greg today up to now. Gary's on vacation in Thailand, so his time difference, it's nighttime for him, quite late. So John's tied up at the moment. So just myself and Greg. So today's we discussing staying on track during the summer holidays and like vacation, things like that. I know a lot of clients, a lot of our clients are traveling a lot with work and business, etc. It's very similar strategy to use as such, where we tend to be a bit more relaxed on vacation with family. Drinks flow a lot, tend to flow a lot more. Food seems to, for a lot of people, go out the window sort of thing, but it doesn't have to. We can have strategies in place that will help, stay on track so you don't not ruin your progress, or it's basically slow the progress down, or the hard work that you put in leading up to it, etc. We don't want to undo all our hard work, so we just thought we'd jump onto dates. The time of year, it's when people are making plans to get away. And yeah, so Greg, straight to it, buddy. How do you do it?
Yeah. Yeah, it's a great question. And as Craig was saying, I think that a lot of the strategies are similar to thinking about work travel, but obviously there's some differences there. So with respect to the similarities, I think part of it is trying to plan ahead a little bit. So thinking about what are some of the things that I might want to do during the trip. So if I know that I want to be able to get certain workouts in, how do I want to approach that? So if we're staying at a hotel, is there a fitness center there or not? If there's not a fitness center, do I want to try to take maybe some exercise bands with me, or do I want to, try to do stuff outside? Am I going to do body weight stuff? So, just thinking through that a little bit. And then also in terms of the meal planning and so on, like if you're on work trips, a lot of those meals are going to be out at restaurants, or they're going to be, things like that. But at the same time, like you can have some strategies in terms of either thinking about like, well, where do we want to go? Or if we go to certain places, what do I want to try to order? So you're not just figuring it out in the moment. And also, like for things like breakfast, maybe breakfast is not out. Like you've gone and gotten some stuff at a local grocery store or something like that. And so at least you can try to take control over certain aspects of that, like, breakfast or snacks or things like that to make it a little easier to manage, kind of the rest of the day. So I think those, from my standpoint, are kind of similarities to the strategies for business travel, where I think it starts to deviate as it relates to the summer and kind of family vacations and stuff, is that, as Craig was saying, it does take on a different dynamic, right? Particularly when you're with kids or when you're with other family members, if they want to um, hey, let's go to this like fun restaurant and like, let's all get like these desserts and things like that. You kind of want to be part of the group and part of the crowd and all of that. There I think I would sort of harken back to some of the strategies from Thanksgiving or Christmas or, some of these other holidays, which is within the program, like it's not that you can't ever have things that you want, right? It's just like, but you can't have those things every meal for an extended period of time and still expect to make progress relative to your goals, right? So just thinking about, okay, for this meal, I know that I'm going to want to, do this particular thing with the family. And so I'll maybe make a different meal choice for this other one so that I kind of have some calories budgeted, if you will, for that particular one, or I'll do it on these 1 or 2 days during the trip, but I'm not going to do it every day, every meal, that kind of stuff. And then with respect to activities and stuff, I think that thinking about how you can build in activity into the trip, right? So it's like, hey, let's go do this like walking thing. Let's go do a hike. Let's go do this more active activity as opposed to maybe a more passive activity, on the vacation, and thinking how you can maybe work some of that in as well, to the trip. I've at least personally found to be successful.
Yeah, brilliant, brilliant. And yeah, like the approach I use myself because I do tend to go away quite often. And I used to be basically an all or nothing guy. It was all, it was go all in or, it's I use more structure now. I tend to try and keep, when it comes to the exercise side, I usually, wherever I'm staying, if it's a hotel, I make sure there's a gym, but it doesn't mean that you guys have to. That there's still plenty of things like Greg said, getting out for a daily walk, doing taking some resistance bands, doing some body weight exercises. With the food side, I keep it similar as such. Obviously, if I'm staying in a hotel, it probably won't have, well, it won't have a kitchen 9 times out of 10. So, like a breakfast, I will always go for something like yogurts or eggs, something high protein, to set up your blood sugar, helps with the hunger. Obviously, proteins are more satiating and energy as well. The same as like on an evening. I don't drink myself, but when I did used to drink, it was always have a dessert or a drink, you know? And I find that approach really helped me and to stay in control. The same as hydration, making sure you're well hydrated. Water really helps to keep you feeling full as well. And the method I use, because when I go on vacation, I do not track, you know. I'm not going to say that I'm the perfect guy that tracks everything. I don't. I tend to basically use like what's called build a plate method. So what I was said earlier, I try and keep my first couple of meals and snacks the same as what I would every day. High protein breakfast, lunch consisting of something like a salad with some protein with it. Dinner is what I enjoy. But the build a plate method I use is half the plate is non-starchy vegetables, quarter protein, quarter carbohydrates, complex carb, something. And I am a gelato guy. I do love my ice cream and gelato. So I do tend to, like I say, every other evening or at dinner with the family, I will have a dessert, but I won't do it every time. I try and skip the bread, but that is my weak point. I really do like bread. So sometimes, like maybe it's the time when I don't have a dessert, I will have a little bit of bread to begin with. Exercise consists as normal. What I do though, I will not do the same amount of sets because I know my wife is going to go crazy if I'm in the gym for an hour and a half or something like that. I just reduce my sets and sometimes I'll just do a full body workout, but I try to keep it the same as possible. Greg, what about, do you take anything with you when it comes to the nutrition side, like protein bars, protein powders, anything like that, Greg?
Yeah, I do have some strategies there. I mean, before I get into that, I actually do want to pick up on one thing that you said, which I think is really important here, which is to not fall into an all or nothing
Yeah,
kind of mindset with this, right? I think it's very easy to say, okay, if I can't be perfect with this, then I'm gonna just like do nothing at all, right? Or I'm gonna completely ignore it, over the course of this 1 or 2 week, trip or something like that. And I think that that's like a really big trap that you can fall into. And it's certainly one that I've like sort of fallen into before, right? Where all of a sudden it's like, well, I'm out of my normal routine. I'm here with the family. I have, all of these reasons to like not be perfect in terms of like what I'm doing with nutrition or exercise and stuff. And so I'm just going to ignore it entirely, right? And I think as Craig said, just think of it more as like a continuum and a gradient, and to sort of say, you know what, like these things aren't going to be perfect or ideal or things like that, but I'm just making conscious choices. I'm making intentional choices. And like one intentional choice that I'm making is that I'm going to maybe pare back a little bit on the exercise. I'm going to pare back on the nutrition a bit. Maybe that's going to, cause me to plateau just a little bit, with respect to, progress that I'm making on these other health goals that I have. But, I'm being very conscious around how I want to trade that off against this time with my family or, indulging in certain ways or whatever it is, as opposed to having it be this like kind of uncontrolled thing where you're sort of at the whim of what's going on with the family or with the trip or that kind of stuff, right? And so that for sure is something that I would maybe emphasize in terms of what Craig said. In terms of his question about, well, how do I manage the sort of nutrition side of that, or what do I take? Um, I'm at least personally a big fan of like Airbnbs and or hotels that do have like a little kitchenette area, or at least knowing that there's going to be a fridge in the room. And so I think that, depending on your preferences, that can work. But a lot of times these days there are fridges in hotel rooms. And, to the extent that there's like a convenience store nearby or there's like a grocery store or something, it's like typically not that hard to at least get some basics, like Craig was saying, in terms of, yogurt or um, for a while I would travel with like protein powders and things like that. I will say that I got hung up in airport security once where like one of the protein powders that I had like triggered their like bomb detection thing and they had to call someone out, and it was like this whole thing. I didn't get arrested or anything, thankfully, but so I've maybe like pared back on that a little bit. I've had other instances where I would like be traveling with like creatine and whatever in these little baggies, and airport security would pull them out thinking that they were like cocaine and whatever. So
Yeah,
same
yeah,
thing. Like I've kind of pared back on that just a little bit. But even still, like there's like these days, like it's fairly easy again, whether it's at a grocery store or whatever, you can buy core power, you can buy muscle milks. There's a bunch of things that you can do that are kind of like pretty good proxies in terms of like protein shakes or protein drinks or that kind of stuff. And you can just buy them once you get to whatever your location is, and they work pretty well. They tend that a lot of them are like room stable, so you don't even have to worry about refrigerating them, and if you don't want to. And so that tends to be my go-to. I do tend to travel with protein bars in particular, just because I find that they're a pretty convenient, snack to have available, or something that if I'm like on the go, at least there's something I can reach for that I know the nutritional value of, as opposed to just whatever might happen to be available in the
mhm.
moment.
Cool, excellent, excellent. And something else that I try and stick to as well is my sleep schedule. Again, which is very important. But 9 times out of 10, majority are going to be having later nights, etc. They haven't got work the next day. I always try and make sure I get a minimum of 7 hours sleep a night to make sure I'm feeling fresh for the next day, I'm ready for the next day. But also, I always take earplugs and an eye mask because staying in hotels can get a bit noisy. What I've found is that has made a huge difference to my sleep whilst on vacation as well. And what about yourself, Greg? Do you try and stick to a schedule yourself when it comes to sleep?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I think that's also a really good point that Craig's making is that, sometimes one of the challenges, I mean, it's the same challenge with work travel as well, but like, time zones can be an issue, if you're kind of getting thrown off that way. And so I do think that sleep consistency is important, and kind of I think it also just like frankly like helps the whole family as well, right? You know, it's like I mean to the extent that you're traveling, particularly with kids or things like that, like trying to help them stay in a certain schedule and stuff, you know, also helps them kind of regulate their own, you know, energy and how thrown off or not they are come in their behavior, which then often like spirals into other things, right? You know, it's like if the kids are just kind of cranky or they're, you know, having some trouble because they're just tired and worn out, then, you know, no one's really having a good time. You know, you're going to maybe be more, you know, apt to then want to, you know, just be like, okay, well, let's just go, you know, treat ourselves to this other, you know, meal or dessert or something like that, or, you know, there's a bunch of other compensating strategies that you might start to employ where the root cause is just like, you know what, like we just need to get a good night's rest. And, you know, certainly, as Craig said, you know, noise can sometimes be an issue. I also find that like just a very simple thing, I just actually just, you know, was reminded of this with something I was doing over this past weekend, like just even as soon as you go into the room, like making sure that you're sort of familiar with how the thermostat in the room like
Yeah,
works and
yeah.
things like that. Because at least if you're at home, like you kind of know like here's the right temperature and here's the right setting and things like that, such that you're not too hot or you're not too cold, you know, in the night and you know, all that kind of stuff. Like when you're in a hotel room, it's a little bit more, you know, variable. And so just being cognizant of those other factors that can throw off your sleep as well, becomes important.
Mm. Yeah, and one thing that I do myself as well, and you know, I don't expect our clients to do it, Greg, but I take a scale, a body weight scale. I have a travel one. It's a lot lighter, a lot smaller than a regular bathroom scale. So it's what I do is as normal. I weigh myself every day, and if the scale's going up too far, this is what helps me, dictate as into what I need to do for the next day. Do I need to pull back a little bit? Have I overindulged? I do overindulge on vacation. I'm not going to lie. Like I said, I love ice cream. I love gelato. I enjoy I've got a sweet tooth, but that scale, especially with being easy on the tracking of the food as well, obviously, quite a lot of the time, majority of the time, you're going to be eating out. So you're not going to take a food scale out and weigh everything and track it. Holidays are for enjoying. But again, we don't have to let it ruin our progress that we've made, you know, up to that date, if that makes sense. What about yourself, Greg? Do you ever take a scale yourself, or do you?
I have not taken the scale. I'm certainly not opposed to something like that, but I tend to be like pretty limited on capacity in my bag. Like my wife and I tend to travel pretty light when it comes to like luggage and that sort of a thing. So I haven't gone the scale route, but I will say that like one of the things, coming back to this kind of all or nothing, you know, kind of mindset for a second, and what Craig said in terms of, you know, having there be at least some feedback loop in this. Um, you know, I think one of the other things that I try to remind myself of, not in a like, you know, fun killer way, you know, but just being kind of realistic and honest with myself, is the calories that you eat or the food that you eat or the drinks that you have like when you're on vacation, they count just as much as the food or the drinks that you have like when you're not on vacation, when it comes to like weight gain and you know that sort of a thing, right? So, you know, I will like often if I'm on vacation and to Craig's point, like I'm, you know, oh, hey, should I have this ice cream right now or should I have this bag of M&Ms or should I have this, you know, extra drink over here or that kind of a thing? Like I will sort of say to myself, hey, that's maybe another 500 calories or something like that. Do I really like want or need that right now? Or am I just, you know, am I just doing it because it's available, right? Or because I'm like in this sort of vacation mode and just having that moment of awareness or, you know, kind of reflection, I find to be helpful to sort of say, you know what, like right now I'm kind of good, right? And I don't need this thing. Or alternatively, like, no, like actually I'm in this moment, I'm with my family, we're all having this like special dessert and whatever, and like I just want to be part of this family moment and like and now I'm going to make this very intentional choice to do that. Like, I do think that to Craig's point, like whether it's traveling with a scale, whether, I know some people travel with food scales, like John's talked about that before, he's posted on that. Um, I haven't done that necessarily either, but I think it's a great idea. I think just anything that you can do to create like a little bit of a feedback loop for yourself, or at least like try to create some level of self-awareness around, kind of what's going on, whether you're getting a little bit off track or not. And then again, bringing it back to once you have that awareness, then making some intentional choices about, well, what do I want to do about that, right? Do I want to cut back a little bit the next day? Do I want to, maybe make some slightly different food choices? Do I want to, try to get some a greater level of activity in, over the, ensuing days? Like just having something that can trigger that, I think becomes really important because otherwise it's just really easy to be kind of unintentional and just kind of go with the flow, if you will, and then end up with whatever result you're going to end up with, but maybe not necessarily the one that you would otherwise want.
Yeah, yeah, and sometimes, like with a food scale, if I'm staying in an Airbnb, or a lot of the time we will hire a villa. I tend to, I like to have my own space. I like to get up in the morning, do my own thing, not run for, like, be the first one down to get the sun lounges around the swimming pool and things like that. So that, then if I'm preparing a lot of my own food, taking the food scale myself, I've known, I've done it quite a few times. And I find it does really help, as well. But if it was one or the other, I would always take a bathroom scale. I just feel that in more control, getting still keeping, on that structure to what I use at home by weighing daily to see where I am there. Like I say, it gives me a bit of direction, as in what I need to do the next day. And something what I'd like to do as well sometimes as well is fast, is fast in the morning and push my first meal further back in the day, depending on what we've got planned, So we tend to try and go on vacation for family birthdays and things like that. But, so that tends to be a big meal, a celebration. That's when I will fast, save them calories that I would normally have a breakfast for later in the day. Is there anything
Yeah.
else you want to touch on there, Greg?
Yeah, no, I mean, one of the words that you just used was routine. And I think, I would maybe emphasize that one as well, which is the one thing to also be cognizant of is that, when you're not on vacation and so on, you're spending all of this time and effort, both in this program and in other parts of your life, trying to create healthy routines or create, routines around self-care. That interrelates with sleep, but it also interrelates with, exercise and nutrition and things like that. And I think one of the risks, if you will, with, family trips or just, things like that, or even just like the summer period in general, like kids are out of school, maybe it's like more of an unstructured time depending on what you have going on. Sort of abandoning those routines. Like, if you look at, books like Atomic Habits or, other things, like it takes a while to build up a routine, right? And then once you break it, or once you break certain habits, it then requires a whole lot more effort to like then reestablish them again. And so to the extent that you can do things to maintain as much as possible, like the habits and routines that you've developed, just regardless of what's going on, right? So, if weighing yourself is a really important part of that routine, as Craig said, like it's worth traveling with a scale, right? I mean, like, if you tend to exercise first thing in the morning every day, and that's like part of how you approach things, like finding a way, even if it's like waking up before everyone else and, getting out for a workout so you don't miss any of the other family time. Great. Like, try to really stick with that part of the routine. If you tend to, have certain things for breakfast, or for snacks, like as much as possible, see what you can do to maintain that so that you can just keep at least that part of the consistency in place. And so that way, when you then are done with the trip, you're still in that mode. You're still, kind of doing that, as opposed to then having to exert all of this new effort to like shift back and, reestablish, kind of habits and things like that. So I do think that there's a lot of power in, maintaining, some of those behavioral patterns that you're in, particularly if you feel like they're really working for you, right? So
Yeah. Brilliant. That is a great point, Greg. Yeah. And like Greg, what you mentioned there about getting reestablishing that routine can be difficult for a lot of people.
mhm.
It's happened to me plenty of times, and this is why I tend to, keep my routines as the same, as similar as possible as normal every day. I always, whilst I'm on holiday, or vacation, I get up at the same time. I wake at 5 a.m. I try and get me training in. I get me training in before the family's even up. I get a walk in before they're even up because plus I still work when I'm on vacation as well. So I like to, I will get more done in the first 3 hours by the time the family gets up than most people get done in a day. Yeah. Anything else you want to touch on, Greg?
No, I think those are I think we probably hit the high points.
Excellent, excellent. So, yeah, what I'm doing now, I'm just in the process of putting something together like a cheat sheet for vacations, which is going to, we have one for traveling with work and business, but I'm just putting one together now for vacation because it is slightly different. It's a slightly different approach to use. You don't want to be that guy that's on vacation whilst everyone's eating nice food. You're there with your chicken and rice and broccoli. And, we still want you to have a good time because you do not need to ruin the progress. Anyway, Greg, thank you very much for your time. And again, team, if you have any questions, just shoot me or Greg a message or anything that you want covering on these podcasts. It is a great help to us as well, because as you can imagine, we do these bi-weekly. We're always looking for different things. So try and think of something that you're struggling with most where you feel is going to be us discussing it is going to help.